captures the behavior of top 50 liquid stocks, which make up 50% of the market capitalization of the country. It has dropped by 15.4% in the first half of the current financial years, whereas during the previous years, it remained roughly stagnant. So capital market shows no upsurge in capital being raised. Bank credit to the commercial sectors, no sharp increase. And sanctions and disbursements from term lending institutions show a sharp decline. The only positive feature is the increase in the output of capital goods. Does this point to a sharp recovery in investment rate? In my opinion, it does not suggest. And therefore, what is it that we need to do to increase the investment rate? The survey does mention that weak investment is a problem area. In recent years, investment rates in our country have hovered around 24%. The peak was reached in 95-96 when investment as a percentage of GDP was as high as 26%. Since then, largely because of a fall in the growth of private investment, total investment has not risen the way one would like. And if we are talking in terms of a growth rate of 8% of the economy, we need an investment rate of about 32-33%. We need a domestic savings rate of about 30%. From the current investment rate of about 24%, the current domestic savings rate of 23%, the Honorable Finance Minister should explain what is it that will ensure that the economy, which is now hovering at 5.5%, is now poised in the next 3 or 4 years to move on to the growth path of 8% growth rate. The review is totally silent on some of these issues. Madam, sorry, sir. Sorry, sir. I come to the other issues with regard to the rapid improvements in infrastructure. I've been looking at the figures of infrastructure, and there is certainly an improvement in the production of cement. There is certainly an improvement in the production of steel, and I do believe that the housing sector, also the national roads projects, have helped, I think, to lift, the morale of producers in both cement and steel sectors, and this is to be welcome. But overall, electricity generation continues to be a weak point. The review does mention a large catalogue of reforms, but what is happening to the generation of power? The generation of power in the year 2001 increased by 3.9%. In the next year, it increased by 3.1%. And in the first half of the current year, it increased merely by 4% as against 2.7% in the corresponding period of last year. In the same way, the output trends in the production of coal are far from encouraging. In 1999-2000, coal production increased by 3.1%. It went up next year to 3.5%. In the year 2001-2002, it went up to 4.2%, and this year also it is hovering at 4.6%, judging by the figures of the first half of the current years. Same way, the production of crude oil. The crude oil production fell in 1999-2000 by 2.4%. It went up next year by 1.5%, declined again in the year 2001-2002 by 1.2%. This year it is up, but marginally to 4.5%. So while we all agree that there is need to increase the efficiency and output of infrastructure sectors, I think with the exception of cement and steel, I think the output trends, though marginally better, do not indicate that we are witnessing a widespread industrial revivals. I was looking at the subclassification of industrial indices, and I come to the conclusion that it is only 6 out of 17 sectors which are roughly responsible for 50% of the index of industrial production. They show a robust increase. For the rest, the picture is one of stagnation or decline. So there is no assurance as of now that we have a recovery which is strong enough, which would really lift all the boats. Recovery is patchy. Recovery is visible in some sectors. The challenge before our economy is how to make it broad-based, how to ensure that it is strong enough to lift all the boats that are sailing in the economy, and on that I think the review is completely silent as to what needs to be done to achieve that sort of objective. Sir, the third point mentioned in the review is making continuous progress in fiscal consolidation. Now, we have been talking of fiscal consolidation for the last 10 years, and I regret to say that the last 5 years have witnessed year after year retrogression, not progression, in matters relating to fiscal consolidations. We know, for example, that the budget for 2001-2002 was disastrous in terms of the shortfall in current revenues, particularly tax revenue. We know, for example, how year after year, in the last 5 years, the fiscal deficit targets, the revenue deficit targets have been missed, that the revised figures have shown a much worse figure than the budget estimate, and the actuals have shown still much worse figure than the revised estimates. Today, we have a situation where, taking the center and the states together, the combined fiscal deficit of both the central government and the state government stands at about 10 to 11% of our GDP. If we are serious about moving to 8% growth rate, then we have to bring down this deficit, both for the center and the states combined, to no more than 4% of our GDP. And how are we going to achieve that? The review does mention some things, but as I said, those things have been disowned by the finance ministry itself. There is, I think, no indication that subsidies are going to be tackled. There is no indication that restructuring of the government and not filling the surplus jobs that have been identified, that thing will be done. And as far as the expenditure is concerned, although the overall aggregate expenditure in the first half has risen by about 12%, as far as the capital expenditure is concerned, if I read the figures correctly, I think there is an increase of only about 3.5%. So the quality of fiscal adjustment, the quality of expenditure adjustment that one seeks and one needs is also not there. Sir, what needs to be done to raise the tax GDP ratio, we all know. The review does talk of an efficient fiscal system. But what are the elements of that efficient financial system? The central government and the state governments are now committed to the introduction of a value-added tax system in the states from 1st of April 2003. But even now, we do not have the drafts of all the bills that are going to be passed by the state governments. Also, there are several issues. How will the states which lose money as a result of introduction of value-added tax system will be compensated? How will we treat the services tax? Will the Constitution be amended? If it will be amended, In what way it will be amended? How will we treat the central sales tax? How will we treat the various definitions, like what is an input? Now, if we do not clarify all these issues, and if you introduce a value-added tax from the 1st of April in states, I think there will be utter confusion, and the results may be completely opposite to what we seek, that the value-added tax system's introduction should mean a move towards a more rational, more progressive, a tax system free of the cascading effects. For that, it is very essential that the preparatory work that is necessary should be seen to be done, and I urge the Honorable Finance Minister to come out with a white paper about the state of progress of the states with regard to the introduction of the value-added tax from 1st of April year 2003. Sir, coming to the various issues of structural reforms, the review does mention labor market reforms. It does mention reform of the small-scale industry reservations. It does talk in a vague sense of other related areas of structural reforms. But what will be needed to operationalize some of these concerns, one doesn't get. And what are the alternative means of achieving, for example, flexible labor markets? What are the options available to impart a greater element of dynamism to small-scale industry? What are the options that we have in tackling the various structural bottlenecks that our economy faces? On these, the policy options that are available, they are not spelled out. And therefore, from that point of view, the survey, I think, apart from repeating the familiar, I think, points, does not add to our knowledge. It does not sharpen the policy debate. And I hope that next time the Finance Ministry comes with a document of this sort, they would attend to some of the concerns that I have mentioned. All the same, I welcome, I think, the initiative taken by the Honorable Finance Minister to come out with a mid-year review document. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, sir. Having gone through this document, mid-year review, November 2002 by the government, I was reminded of an anecdote, what I had read several years back. The well-known philosopher and literature, Sir Bertrand Russell, had gone to United States of America to deliver a series of lectures. So, in one of those lectures, he started his remarks by saying that 80% of the Americans are idiots. So the hall was full of people, and they started throwing tomatoes and rotten eggs and things like that. So immediately he gave a pause. And then he retorted back, but ladies and gentlemen, let me remind you, 20% of the Americans are very intelligent, and there were kudos. So this document, the mid-year review, provokes that kind of a sense. As Dr. Manmohan Singh has so elaborately pointed out, the very small and insignificant increments in some of the broad parameters of the Indian economy. This is a bland document. We may not agree with the philosophy and the thinking of this government, that is something different. And one can also venture to have a clash of views on those things. But I think it is a bland document. It has no prognosis that what is ailing our economy. Because ultimately, economy is all about the well-being of the people. The economy is a mirror of the health of our people, that how our people are there. We may make very tall claims, but ultimately, the majority of the people of this country, how the economy is affecting or not affecting the quality of their lives, that is ultimately what one wants to find out. Because we are not having a erudite discussion in an academic seminar. We as public representatives are concerned about the well-being of our people or lack of it. Therefore, in the parliament, when we have a debate on this kind of a document, we have to have with us something which will give us some clue about how our people are living. Now, sir, we know that economy is all about how a country, how a nation is mobilizing their resources and how they are deploying those resources for bringing about continuous improvement in the conditions of their living. Now, so far this review is concerned, we are not having any clue that how we are going to face the stupendous challenges that we are going to have. So this morning I think about 30 special mentions have been made by different members of this house. So day in and day out, whatever, whether it is the question hour, whether it is the special mention submissions, whether it is the debates on bills, whether it is short duration discussions like this, we come up with problems, but where we find ourselves as a nation collectively wanting is the lack of resources. So therefore, the question is how to find and where from to find those resources. Because unless we recognize that what should be the legitimate method to raise resources, we will be in a big difficulty. Because as Dr. Singh has very correctly pointed out, that you see last time our tax revenue collection as compared to the budgeted figures went negative. And now therefore some small increase is showing a major positive increase in percentage terms. But in terms of facing the challenges that we face, how far that increment is adequate, that is the question. Now with the abysmal level of tax to GDP ratio that we have in our country, can we afford to not only talk of growth figures which appear at this point in time not only unrealistic, but also, totally inadequate in terms of facing the major challenges facing the Indian people. Now, I am very, very sorry with the kind of approach which this document has been read. There's almost a dispassionate nonchalance about the fact that people are dying of starvation. Now, I will just quote, sir, from the section which deals with the food situation in our overview. The document states, I quote, the Food Corporation of India held 51.4 million tons of food grain stock on October 1, 2002. Adequate supplies have prevented flare-ups in prices of most essential commodities despite a critically deficient monsoon. The latest 52-week average inflation based on the WPI was 2.3% as on November 9, 2002. The annual rate of inflation based on the consumer price index for industrial workers, which is the retail price index, declined from 4.7% and beginning of 2002-2003 to 4.3% in September 2002. Despite a rise in global oil prices, the transition from administered price mechanism to a market determined price system for domestic petroleum products was, I underline, smooth. Now, so the question is, in Rajasthan if people die, in Odisha people die, we have a debate among the political class that which political party is responsible for that. Now naturally Rajasthan, there is a Congress government. The ruling benches will say that Rajasthan government is responsible. Rajasthan government will try to say, no, it is not their fault, it is the result of the central government's policy. But if we are talking of consensus, which coming out of his selective amnesia, our Honorable Prime Minister also sometimes says, when it suits him, about consensus. Are we, as a polity, going to rise above these political differences, discuss the question that why people are dying of starvation? We never do that. To us, inflation rate comes down, situation is smooth. Now the point is, why 1.4 billion tons of food are rotting in FCI go down, still people are starving like insects? That is the question. When it started? It started with the decision to increase the administered prices sold in our ration shops, PDS shops. That was, sir, in 2001 budget. The whole idea was that we have to bring down the food subsidy. So the result is, continuously food subsidy is increasing. Our expenditure on food, 99-2000 it was 12,000, 2000-2001 14,000 crores. Now I don't have the immediate data. I asked a question in this session, sir, that what is the cost of procuring, transporting and storing food grains in FCI godowns of 1 million tons. Now daily expenditure on that is, Food Minister has replied, 1 crore. Now according to this review, the present stock is almost 52 million tons, and buffer, safe buffer norm is about 17 million tons. So we have roughly 34 million tons of excess of food grains. So every day we are spending 34 crores of rupees in this country, and over a month we are spending 34 into 30, and in the year 34 into 30 into 12. So this is all for cutting down our subsidies. But if this stock is liquidated by giving this money for food for work program for those who are dying of starvation, now that can be worked out, how we can improve the delivery system, how we can improve the efficiency of the system, which will ultimately take those food grains to the people who are dying out of want of food. There is a question that can be discussed, and on that there can be a national consensus. Because in this house today, we represent almost all the major political parties. But let us first decide that how to liquidate those stocks. Now we often talk about America and other developed countries. I was trying to also find out from articles and publications what is the method that they follow in United States. Now they have this food stamp system. Now who is entitled to a food stamp in United States? Any individual who is spending more than the 1/3 of his or her earning on food consumption, they are entitled to get food stamp. I was trying to extrapolate same kind of parameters for the Indian situation. Sir, you will be surprised to know that more than 85% of the Indian population today, if we go by that yardstick, will be entitled to food subsidy. Therefore, when we discuss these questions, we cannot detach ourselves from the Indian reality. What kind of reforms we are talking about? Unless we realize that what is the problem, why is the problem? You see, the factors that Dr. Manmohan Singh was mentioning, that there is a slight increase in the production of steel and production of cement. Why it has happened? The major factor, he correctly diagnosed, is the massive spending on the National Highway Program. Now, this is a public sector-led investment which has led to demand generation and which has ultimately resulted in some incremental growth in the production of those two infrastructure sector industries. Now, unless we recognize in this country, we may shout from rooftops. Mr. Jaitley was there earlier, now Mr. Shauri is there, that we will privatize everything. It is not possible. You see, we have willy-nilly, all of us, we have agreed for these reforms in the power sector. But what is happening? On the one hand, information is there that Madhya Pradesh government he does not agree and it will have to provide subsidy to keep in line with the national policy, and the total subsidy bill will be to the tune of rupees 900 crores. People are fighting out in the streets in Calcutta today because the order that has been given by the State Electricity Regulatory Commission completely at one go phasing out all kinds of cross subsidies and the kind of increment that there will be in the power bill. And everywhere, we also have done. We have opposed the Andhra Pradesh government on the streets of Hyderabad and rest of the cities. Now the issue here, as a nation, what should be the approach? What is practicable? Is it practicable? We were earlier told that Odisha, the power sector reforms, Mr. Murli Devra is, fortunately for me, very, very intensively listening to my speech. He was the convener, and Honorable Finance Minister was the chairman of the standing committee. Excellent report on fast-track power projects. But what happened to them? Because the problem is not only with the generation, the cost at which it is produced, and whether the consumers that are there, who are the people of this country, are in a position to afford that power on a cost basis. That is the question. So what happened? Odisha, great reforms. But ultimately, the distribution company, the American company, which is, I think, known to the CESCO, in the coastal region, they said, "Sir, thoda, मैं असल में वो
मैंने टाइम मैंने केवल घड़ी दिखाई है, रोका नहीं।
नहीं सर, मैं उनका सम्मान करते हुए मनमोहन जी को मैं छोड़ दिया। So sir, no, therefore what I am saying that Odisha में in the 9 districts अभी वो American company बोल रहा है कि we will not be distributing, providing power to 44% of the rural households because it is not profitable. Now therefore, to what extent you can privatize, to what extent you can have a situation where you want growth, because in the new millennium, we cannot disagree, we should not disagree that infrastructure and technology has its cost, but in the race for development, race for progress in the Committee of Nations, we have to have these things. Without our per capita consumption growing, you cannot achieve 8% growth which you are talking about. But you cannot provide increased per capita consumption of electricity without subsidizing a section of the consumers. That is the point. So if you see the areas where you have shown growth, telecom. Now the major contribution is still public sector. And it is a sorry statement that I have to make, that people don't realize this, recognize this, that in the telecom sector today, the private sector companies, be it the cellular, be it the fixed line, be it the limited mobile, it is the BSNL which is providing connection in the rural areas. The major private companies are not going, this is the fact. So therefore, in a country like India, embarking on a path which is inspired by the Washington Alliance, and that is affecting the economy. I am saying that yes, I agree with the general proposition that you cannot spend more than you earn. Fiscal wisdom is needed. I don't disagree with that. आवाज तो जा रहा है ना, वही काफी है, वही काफी है. Sir, till now, some of us in the left were raising some of these issues. But now, sir, some of the people who have been very much a part of the policy making and part of this economic philosophical thinking, they have also started saying this. I have with me, sir, a book written by Joseph Stiglitz, who was the winner of the Nobel Prize last year for economics. And he was the chief economist of the World Bank. And he was the chairman of the Economic Advisory Council of President Clinton. Now, what does he say? Sir, he says, I quote, "The problem was that many of these policies became ends in themselves, rather than means to more equitable and more sustainable growth. In doing so, these policies were pushed too far, too fast, and to the exclusion of other policies that were needed." Sir, ये बताया जाता है कि सरकार का बिजनेस में क्या काम है. There is no need for the government to be in the business. Business is for business people. Now, Mr. Stiglitz, he says, as part of his work in the World Bank, he went to a village in Morocco. So he says, he is talking about his own experience. An NGO had painstakingly instructed local villagers on raising chickens, an enterprise that the village women could perform as they continued more traditional activities. Originally, the women obtained their 7-day-old chicks from a government enterprise. But when I visited the village, this new enterprise had collapsed. I discussed with villagers and government officials what had gone wrong. The answer was simple. The government had been told by the IMF that it should not be in the business of distributing chicks, so it ceased selling them. It was simply assumed that the private sector would immediately fill the gap. Indeed, a new private supplier arrived to provide the villagers with newborn chicks. The death rate of the chicks in the first 2 weeks is high, however, and the private firm was unwilling to provide a guarantee. The villagers simply could not bear the risk of buying chicks that might die in large numbers. Thus, a nascent industry poised to make a difference in the lives of these poor patients was shut down. Now, sir, the point is, therefore, nothing should become a dogma. My basic point here would be that some kind of review is needed, not only a mid-year review, but the path we have embarked upon, with all due respects to Dr. Manmohan Singh, that the vision with which we have started a process in 1991, now we have spent about 11-12 years, and we have certain results, empirical experiences. Now, whether that empirical experience is corroborating with the vision with which we have embarked upon that path. And sir, I am sorry to say this government has gone far, far ahead of Dr. Manmohan Singh. Dr. Manmohan Singh's time, at least we did not have PSUs changing hands, as I understand. But here the government is saying only profit-making PSUs can be sold and it should be sold. Now the underlying assumption is that government will withdraw itself and that will be filled up, that space will be filled up with private sector. But that is not happening. If that was happening, then investment would be going up. But the review says that investment is not going up. You have seen, sir, the sharp drop in the credit which is being taken by the commercial enterprises from the banks. Now the situation is, banks are flush with funds, but there are no takers. Each and every financial institution you see, the credit deposit ratio is going down. There are more deposits, less credit. And therefore, the government is still saying that now the banks also must be privatized. On the one hand, some of these corporate players, they take loans from banks, do not repay those loans, and use that money which they have not repaid to the banks for purchasing industrial enterprises which have gone sick. Now, problem is, today morning, my colleague Dipankar Mukherjee raised this question. Earlier we used to hear that fertilizer units are not going because they are in public sector. Now we find all naphtha-based fertilizer units, irrespective of the nature of their ownership, they are not doing well. Then we hear the theory of naphtha being unviable. Then morning we were told that government is spending on some tax waiver on naphtha-based power plants. So what is the policy? What is the approach? And we are seeing as a result of this, sir, this particularly, I share the sentiment of Dr. Manmohan Singh that government has done a good thing, come out mid-year with this kind of a review. But sir, employment, food availability, health situation, literacy, some of the basic issues, primary health, primary education. Unless in a country like India, the mid-year review comes out with data on that, what was the situation? Where we are progressing? Where we need a change of direction? And overall review is needed because, sir, employment situation is very bad. If you see private sector employment, it is coming down. Public sector employment, it is coming down. Other sectors are not going to that extent. It's a vicious circle. The Deputy Prime Minister may go on shouting from the rooftops, we will not tolerate terrorism and we will all fight. We will all join the government in fighting terrorism. But if this is the scenario in the country of the economy, there is no way, I tell you, that you can stop terrorism. So therefore, sir, I have taken little more time, but on some of these basic issues, corporates, they are powerful enough to take care of themselves. Sir, last 5-6 years, bank interest have come down 5 to 6%. The old retiree, middle class, who has kept all his money in small deposits. You see, what is the situation? 6% drop in the interest rate. On the one hand, on the other hand, when he goes to the market for buying essential commodities, he has to pay 6 times more. Your fluctuations in the CPI does not capture the actual situation that he or she is confronted with when they go for their daily consumption items from the shops. So therefore, sir, I think it is high time that we started a serious exercise. We will extend cooperation to the government, but we are going to an explosive situation. There will be food riots in this country. Today people will die, but tomorrow they will revolt. And we have no justification with us that 51.4 million tons in the stocks and still people dying out of starvation. People not getting education. People not getting basic health. And sir, in a country like India, privatization cannot be the panacea for all ills. You will continue to have the kind of data that you have in the mid-year review time after time. Because we are not making the basic prognosis. that the strength of India is in its numbers, in the hugeness of the market that can be potentially generated if we empower our people with the purchasing power. The slowdown that we are facing today, no less than that in the global economy, is because of demand compression. So, sir, our attempt should be that how we can enhance the demand of our people, thereby traversing a robust growth path. Sir, I think we urgently appeal to the government that let us make a mid-term review and make mid-course correction if needed, and next time when you come to the parliament, please don't come with some bland statistics, because I am again reminded of that adage, lies, damn lies and statistics. Statistics can conceal more than it reveals. Let the statistics reveal things which are more relevant to our Indian people. Thank you.
Arun Jaitley.
Mr. Chairman, sir, I must at the very outset thank the Honorable Finance Minister for coming out with a comprehensive statement on a mid-term review of the Indian economy. This is perhaps the first time that such a statement has been placed before the country. And as the very opening sentence of the statement says, that this report therefore is in the nature of a status paper on the current situation, is in part fulfillment of the obligation and responsibility. While the report indicates some possible courses of action at the current junction, it does not purport to be either a budget or a forerunner to the budget. It is, as has been promised by the Finance Minister, a part of the process of opening up of the entire budget-making process. The aim is to make policy formulation as well as the monitoring of a continuous effort rather than once-a-year event. Sir, we at least did not expect that the mid-year review would announce any major policy changes as far as the government is concerned. There are no knee-jerk reactions in the matter of management of the economy, but as the opening paragraph itself indicates, it's a process of making the entire performance of the Indian economy more transparent, giving authentic data so that the cost for the future at least can be debated in the country itself. Sir, the report does indicate that there are several positives. It also indicates several areas of concern even today. Last year, we had a growth rate of about 5.4%, despite the deceleration in the growth rates world over. The first quarter this year has already indicated a 6% growth rate in the GDP. When I analyze this document, the strengths or the positives, if I may call it, which were evident were, inflation appears to be broadly under control. Despite drought in several parts of the country, the food grain supply situation and the buffer stocks situation seems to be satisfactory. There is a strong balance of payment situation. Exports seem to have increased by almost as high in the first half by 13.5%. There is a negative import bill, mainly on account of decline in the oil bill. Despite a poor monsoon, the inflation remains broadly at 3%. There is no significant increase in the food prices. As has been conceded, there has been a significant and a noticeable growth as far as infrastructure sector is concerned, 5.6%. Industrial production, the growth has been 5.2%. Several sectors like steel, textile, there is a turnaround which is visible. Tax revenues have also increased. Then there are also areas of concern, sir. And the areas of concern also are in the nature, first on account of a scanty monsoon this year, which may result in a decline as far as agricultural growth is concerned. There is still an element of uncertainty as far as global trade situation is concerned. High international oil prices, no visible increase in FDI inflows into the country, and on account of all these pressures, the projected growth rate has then been about 5 to 5.5%. There are areas, sir, where the effect of the reform process is visible. The highway construction project seems to be going on satisfactorily. There is also a detailed report, state-wise, which is annexed with regard to the situation of the power sector reforms in each state. And though somewhat limping, it seems to be moving slowly in a direction in which we would have liked it to grow. But after hearing, sir, my friend, Mr. Nilotpat Basu, who is not with us at this moment, I find that my concern is not merely one that dwells from these figures and the direction which is given as far as the mid-year review is concerned. Even when Shri Pranab Mukherjee was graceful enough to say that Shri Basu could have the time of the Congress benches because he was making a point, there was one area on which at least he distanced himself from the Congress benches and said, has time come to review the course which Dr. Manmohan Singh, our former finance minister and the current leader of opposition in 1991 had placed the economy onto. He was then critical of us for having carried on that process at a pace much faster than what Dr. Manmohan Singh had originally envisaged. At the same time, he did express that has the time now come for us to think in terms of consensus, be it starvation deaths, be it reforms as far as other areas are concerned. So it is this concern and the initial comment that Shri Basu had made, which actually prompts me that this is at a stage when we are having a midterm review of the economy and we are actually considering and introspecting whether the course we set upon 12 years ago was a correct course or not. He did mention some of the concerns which he thought were very relevant. May I just give one or two illustrations which I came across recently? I am not mentioning these illustrations only to score a point in the course of this debate. And it is irrespective of which party said what. Last week, the Gujarat elections got concluded. In the Gujarat elections, one of the parties had an important statement in its election manifesto that amongst the first things we will do is to abolish the Electricity Regulatory Authority. Now, this was not off-the-cuff statement. It was consciously put as a part of a considered political decision in the election manifesto, perhaps out of consideration. And as he himself mentioned that the people of West Bengal are on the roads because of some recent decision of the Electricity Regulatory Authority, that perhaps having a regulatory authority which then fixes up the tariffs at times become unpopular with the people who control a large number of votes. I remember the same situation took place in Kerala last year when the current chief minister, trying to balance the finances of the state, wanted to be a little conservative in the matter of giving certain more concessions to the government employees, and we had those not in agreement with him almost paralyzing the life in the state for almost a month. West Bengal, for instance, today is facing a similar problem, and the problem, as I understand it, stems from the fact who should pay for litigation. Should the litigant pay by way of court fees? And if the litigant doesn't pay by way of court fees, the general taxpayer will have to pay through the state exchequer, because somebody will have to pay for the cost of those litigations. And you have courts in the state of West Bengal almost paralyzed, with many people supporting that agitation. You had the Punjab experiment, where the chief minister promised one fact before the elections, but ultimately found himself unable to live with that situation. The question which Mr. Basu raised was, as I reframe it, it is being considered by a large number of us, and this is frequently raised in this house, outside this house, have the reforms got a political cost attached to them? And therefore, whenever we raise these questions, then political popularity, political expediency really is that in a number of areas you start going slowly. It is not for the first time that this is being raised in this context today. I remember in 94, 95, when we had about 3 years experience of the reforms, Dr. Manmohan Singh was the finance minister, this question was raised across the board, including in his own political party. Are these reforms perceived to be pro-rich, not influencing the life of the poor man? And therefore, this being the position, is it a correct course that we have gone on? Sir, Shri Basu wanted us to actually debate whether this 91 course, which was a turning point, was a correct course that we embarked upon or not. Sir, I wish to join issue squarely with him on this. Pre-91, yes, I'll.
I think either my English is too poor or somehow I could not put across. The point I made is simply this. The vision that was there, on the basis of which the empirical experience that the Indian economy has come to be enriched with in the subsequent 11 years, I feel that there, and we feel that there is need for a mid-term review of that.
So I think I'm very grateful to Shri Basu for having re-emphasized his point. I precisely want to join issue with what he has said. The issue is not over language or grammar. The issue is, and this is my view, that if a review at all is required at this stage, it is perhaps the process that we have launched upon, which needs to be further accelerated and not turned in any other direction. I say this very squarely, and I say this out of conviction. I do recollect, sir, pre-1991, we have, and there are many in this house much older, much more experienced than me, who have lived through a generation and have greater experience than me, but we have lived through an economy. There were constraints within the economic system, there were constraints because of the lack of resource in the society, but they've lived in an economic system which, if I may be constrained to describe, as a life of shortages that we lived through. Take any segment. Compare the situation post-91 as it has gradually progressed. Compare it to the pre-1991 situation. Compare it to a situation in 1996. Let us take any segment. You are apologetic about giving credit to the private sector in the telecom area, but according to me, if there is one case which makes out a case study for this ideological debate, it is perhaps there is no better illustration than the telecom sector itself. Sir, we had a setup till 1996 where we had a state sector monopoly on the telecom industry. 1996, this country's teledensity was 0.8%. 1996, the queues for telecom were 10 years and 12 years. Earlier in the early part of the 90s, the government took a decision, a very correct decision, to decide to open out to the private sector. A large number of us had also raised questions because we had all grown up in that mindset. Is it a sector which can be opened up to the private sector? There was criticism of the decision. But I must say and confess today the decision was vindicated. It is vindicated because today you are at a stage, after 6 years of implementation of that reform process, where you are close to not only a 4% teledensity in this country, where you have not only eliminated the queues, you have not only brought down the prices and the values of the services, you've also given a much better quality service as far as the consumer is concerned. Had the economic system at any stage, either at the stage of opening out for which the credit would then go to the government which was then in control, or even the change of policy that took place in 1999, which enabled the cost of services to come down. Had the governments not taken that courageous decision, perhaps the success story of the telecom sector would not have been there to sing. Let us take various other sectors. Pharmaceutical sector. Today you are legitimately one of the world leaders as far as pharmaceuticals are concerned. This is the impact of the post-1991 situation. Take for instance the auto sector. You are world leaders as far as two-wheelers are concerned. The plurality of choice to the consumer is far more. Quality is there. Services have come down. You are speaking in terms of a food riot. Well, a food riot is something which we could envisage in the days of food shortages. We may even today in states have trouble with the distribution system. But in a stage where we have gradually moved from to an economy of surplus, where we are in a position to send out 6 to 8,000 crores of food grain out of this country every year, unless we have our own difficulties at the local level in terms of our distribution system, the days of food riot which you imagine in this country are far from over. The days of, I'm afraid, are far over. There is no question of that situation being envisaged today. If it does arise, it's really because of some problem in the distribution setup at the level in which such difficulties can take place. It is this precise reason, sir, and which we can translate to any area. We must realize today that we are in a situation, one, how does the economy grow? The economy grows if there is investment. The economy grows if there is profitability. If there is profitability, there is going to be further investment. There is going to be further generation of employment. If there is further generation of investment, profitability, further revenues to the state, if the state is enriched in terms of revenue, then certainly there is going to be a larger concentration and investment on infrastructure. And if there is a larger investment on infrastructure, you come back, there will be still larger investment as far as the economy is concerned. Are we to move in this direction? Or are we to now today get bogged down to a debate where we decide to take the situation backwards? Today you need an economy in the manufacturing sector which is to be internationally competitive. Now to make it internationally competitive, the argument which we always say, why must our domestic industry, how does it, the manufacturing sector, become internationally competitive? It becomes competitive, and one of the hurdles we say are we giving them utilities at the same cost at which they are available to their counterparts world over? Are we giving them the same labor law regime which is available to their competitors world over? Are we giving them the straight away the cost of capital which is available to their counterparts world over? Now, in case you are talking in terms of consensus, the consensus then has to be, how do you take the 1991 process further? How do you move further in the direction? You don't move further by saying, all right, to make industry competitive, give it capital at cost which is internationally competitive. The moment you do that, I will turn around and say, give the favorite argument which you just did give, but my old pensioners are suffering because interest rates, as far as interest rates payable to them are going down. Cost of utilities, somebody will have to pay for the cost of utilities. Either the industry will pay the very high cost of power and other utilities, or it will have to come from the taxpayer through the exchequer, which means higher taxes. Now in such situations, the government has made a concerted effort in the last 2 years to find out how do you implement power sector reforms. And I must say, sir, that this is one area which is a difficult area in terms of political popularity for every chief minister. But then chief minister after chief minister in their own small way, cutting across party lines, are trying to see how they implement it. You have, I'm sorry.
माननीय प्रधानमंत्री।
सभापति जी, मैंने पहले एक घोषणा की थी कि खरीफ फसल ऋण तथा कृषि मियादी ऋणों दोनों पर चालू वर्ष के ब्याज को आज स्थगित किया जाएगा और मूल ऋणों को मियादी ऋणों में फिर से निर्धारित किया जाएगा। छोटे और सीमांत किसानों के मामले में यह ऋण अगले 5 वर्षों की अवधि में वसूल किया जाएगा, जबकि अन्य किसानों के मामले में ऋण की वसूली की अवधि 3 वर्ष होगी। इसके अलावा इन दोनों तरह के ऋणों पर 1 वर्ष के लिए आस्थगित किए गए ब्याज, जिसकी राशि 6040 करोड़ बनती है, की वसूली देयता के रूप में अगले कई वर्षों तक की जाती रहेगी। इन राज्यों में हमारे किसान भाइयों की मुश्किलों को और कम करने के लिए अब ये निर्णय लिया गया है कि खरीफ ऋणों पर ब्याज की पहले वर्ष की आस्थगित देयता को एक बारगी उपाय के रूप में पूर्णतया छोड़ दिया जाए। इस सुविधा का लाभ उठाने वाले हमारे ऐसे नागरिक ऋण देने वाले अपने बैंक से सीधे ये छूट प्राप्त करने के पात्र होंगे। इस संबंध में समुचित दिशा निर्देश भारतीय रिजर्व बैंक द्वारा जारी किए जाएंगे। जहां तक कृषि निवेश सब्सिडी का संबंध है, मेरी सरकार ने छोटे और सीमांत किसानों को 1490 करोड़ रुपए से अधिक की धनराशि अनुदान के रूप में देने की पहले ही घोषणा कर दी थी। तथापि सूखे की प्रचंडता को देखते हुए मैंने ये निर्णय लिया है कि इस कृषि निवेश सब्सिडी को अब आगे बढ़ाया जाए, ताकि एक बार की उपाय के रूप में और विद्यमान दिशा निर्देशों में छूट देते हुए 2 हेक्टेयर तक की अधिकतम सीमा तक बोए और बिना बोए दोनों क्षेत्रों के लिए अन्य